Obviously, the topic on this panel is the state of journalism in 2025. So we obviously heard from V. Paul Reynolds. I'll open it up. To start with your thoughts.
I'm happy to start, if you'd like. Thank you. Thank you to Sam for pulling this all together today. In thinking about journalism, I thought back to my first lesson in journalism, which was my Uncle Morton. I was in junior high school. My Uncle Mort wrote for Sports Illustrated, and he wrote for Playboy magazine, which of course made him an instant hero in my book.
I love Sports Illustrated too, Will.
I just look at the pictures. And what he told me, and it was fun. He used to work at our camp out at Cobbossee County, and he had the first word processor that I ever saw. And he said, "You've got to come see this." He said, "I can have words on the screen, and I can put a word in the middle, and all the other words will move out of the way." And that was considered outstanding and amazing technology in those days. But he showed me, because he wrote for the national magazines, whenever he made a declarative statement in anything that he wrote, he had to footnote it, not for the reader, but for the editor to fact check it later. And that was a great lesson to me about how journalism is supposed to work. Nowadays, as Paul indicated, there's a lot of competition for that. There's been a lot of dilution of the concept of journalism. We are dealing with anonymous posts on the internet. Folks can hide, but back in the day when you wrote something, you signed your name to it. And if you wrote something on the wall at school, everyone knew your handwriting, so they knew who did it. So you always had to be able to account for it even then. With anonymous posts, there is a loss of understanding about the responsibility that comes with writing something. I get unsolicited submissions every week, if not every day. And I'll write back and I'll thank the folks. I'll say, "We don't really have a lot of room for anything extra, but by the way, where did you get these ideas? Or where did you get this photograph?" "Oh, it was on the internet." That's the answer. That's the journalistic answer at this point. I saw it on the internet. And that's not helpful to me as being the one who's being asked to put it out into the public.
Bill?
Yeah, I'm Bill Green, and I work for, I'm a little bit different than these other guys because I worked at commercial television stations. And just like newspapers, these are difficult times for commercial media like that. And my specialty became outdoor recreation, and because of Bud Levitt, that meant hunting and fishing. So, but our look at outdoor recreation included swimming, sailing, paddling. Not that that's not outdoor stuff, but mine was not we were far away from putting kill shots on the 6 o'clock news. So we were trying to do hunting and fishing stuff in such a way that it wasn't insulting people at their dinner table in families that didn't hunt with children that didn't hunt. So my perspective was a little bit different. But to go back to what grouchy old Paul Reynolds said, and please tell him I said this is going to be on because he big times us by going to an ice fishing derby and sends in a video. Jesus, all right. Hi, Paul. But I think we all agree that we moved away from the era where media organizations were objective informers, gatekeepers of information for the reader viewer to consider. And while, if you want to look at it historically, maybe in the 18th and 19th century, it might have been even worse. But for practical purposes, we are into an era of advocacy journalism now, which is a contradiction. I don't think you can be an advocate in what my definition of a journalist is. But we live in an age where journalists still create the agenda for news, but the platform controls the access. And by platform, I mean the TV station, the newspaper, or any of the social media platforms that we deal in, particularly YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, X, Threads, and TikTok. So journalism, in the definition of fair and balanced, really is losing the battle for the public's interest because it's not fair and balanced anymore. And you pick the side you want to hear, and you turn on that station or pick up that publication. and we've lost a great deal of public trust because of it. And that's why the numbers are sinking badly. I don't know what the circulation numbers of these publications are, but I know in general, numbers are, circulation numbers are way down. The companies that fund news are challenged because of the financials of running a newspaper organization, and people here can talk about that better than me. And therefore, this weakens what I call professional journalists. I think, having worked for a TV station where an advertiser could not come in and dictate what I did for stories, and they did not, where my management had to stick up for me when the advertiser came and pulled advertising. Two of the people I got in trouble with were Yoo-Hoo and Toyota down through the years. It leaves the professional, now that there is more influence and there's more almost product placement, etc., it leaves the traditional journalist more vulnerable to commercial and political pressures. So where I could pretty much do what I wanted, some of these young kids that you're seeing now are walking a really fine line between old school journalism and modern advocacy journalism, I think. So, what is the future of journalism? We've reached the era where everyone with a social media account, by a broad definition of journalist, is a journalist. A clever kid on TikTok can easily build a following larger than the publications that are represented here today. Every organization, such as SAM, IF&W, should determine what its story is and have a plan for getting its own story out through its own journalism. And I checked with 3 hunters before I came in, who, the only 3 I know under 35, where they get their outdoor news, and they basically said Facebook. The page, the Maine Deer Hunters website and stuff like that. So, get on there. Get on there and use it. Get your story out through those things. If you are an organization like SAM or a sporting camp or the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, have a good website. And not just a website that's up to date, but make it entertaining, interactive, and refresh it all the time. Because people will come back. If it's the same website, they won't come back. And you need to be on Facebook, YouTube, X, Threads, and if you're so inclined, TikTok. I think that'd be a hell of a TikTok page, right? Deer Hunters, Maine Deer Hunters TikTok page would be something to see. And you cross promote through the various platforms. For example, Paul gave a very nice speech. He could have cut it into a 10-second spot and put it on X. He could have cut it to a 10-second, a 1-minute spot and put it on YouTube. He could have, and you need to cross promote within your own journalistic effort to get your word out. But I wouldn't recommend that you sit there and wait for Channel News Center Maine, for whom I work, 5, 8, 13, 7, to come and tell your story, because I don't think they're coming. And I think you have a responsibility now to become a journalist and tell your own story. And if you are, be ready, should anyone come or should anyone be interested, to be that spokesperson, to have the story that you want to tell, whatever the story is, have your thoughts organized and be ready to speak to whomever to get your side of the story out. And those are my thoughts about where journalism today. Journalism has already changed, and certainly I'm behind. And we can't move fast enough into the future to control the story the way we would like.
I'm going to use the dais because this is the time of day when my voice usually abandons me. I'm going to give it a national perspective, but I think you're going to see a lot of commonality between what I say and what has already been said. Just very brief intro. I've been at this for about 30 years. I've written thousands of articles for well over 100 publications. And I call this the perfect storm. If you're old enough to remember when MTV first debuted, the very first video, back when they used to play music videos, the very first video they played was Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles. It sounded pretty prophetic at the time. It turned out almost to be, but I think radio is doing quite fine. But it did nearly mortally wound the print journalist. Back when I was a kid, we had heroes. We had Jim Zumbo, we had Lefty Kreh, Dick Ilo, Jimmy Robinson, Jack O'Connor. These were the heroes of the outdoor world. They wrote for magazines, they wrote books. Then along came videotapes, hunting videos, then DVDs, then outdoor television, which started as The American Sportsman, and then became a series of ESPN Saturday morning, then an outdoor channel, then 3 outdoor channels. Print media was relegated to the next lowest tier, and anyone with a video camera became an instant celebrity. Meanwhile, the industry was plagued with buyouts and consolidations, and I'll give you an example. A company called EMAP bought Peterson's Hunting, Peterson's Bow Hunting. Several other smaller titles canceled the other titles, so 6 went to 2. Intermedia bought EMAP, and they also bought all of the regional game and fish publications, New York Game and Fish, Pennsylvania Game and Fish, Michigan Game and Fish. Then they were bought by Cronky Outdoors. Then they reduced 37 magazines to 4 regional publications, Game and Fish publications. And that's just one example. There were many, many more. There was once a dozen bow hunting specific magazines. Now there are 4. Meanwhile, the big 3, Sports Afield is gone. Outdoor Life, Field and Stream are now online only. The national magazines that I write for, much of the copy now is ad driven. It's trying to get you to buy something. Thank God we have tabloids, like the Maine Sportsman and the Northwood Sporting Journal, because they give you what you want to read, not what the editor wants you to read. Another bad trend. Meanwhile, as was already mentioned, the internet. Okay, here's this sudden proliferation of free content. Why should I buy a magazine if I can go online and get free content? Well, for starters, do you know anything about the person that wrote that article? Do they have any credibility whatsoever? Now, instead of the guy that bought a video, the guys that can't afford video cameras, they write blogs. So anyone with a keyboard now is an outdoor hero, an outdoor personality. Brings us down another level. Meanwhile, pay rates. This is my big gripe. I've written for a Maine newspaper, which I won't mention the name of, for 22 years. When I started 22 years ago, I got paid $100 a column. You know what I get paid now? 22 years later, $100 a column. If I were given the annual 4% cost of living adjustment for that, which I should have been, I'd be making $287 a column. So I'm losing out on about $4,000 a year. Advertising costs have gone up. Pay rates haven't. The company the national company that manages the local trust that runs that paper, their CEO increased their 6-figure salary by 65% last year. $100 a column. I've been very fortunate to have traveled around the country, hunted and stayed in some of the finest lodges, met some of the finest people, but I would not recommend anybody go into outdoor journalism now.
So we have one more person who's joined us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Sam Patton, and I'm filling in for Steve Robinson. I'm the managing editor of the Maine Wire. Steve was hoping to be here, but when the schedule changed, he couldn't make it. So a couple of just quick observations on the state of the media generally. I've got, certainly we have to begin negatively, because there's a lot of negative out there. I agree wholeheartedly with what Bill said about advocacy journalism. I'd call it something worse. We have agenda journalism in America today, and not just America, it's a global phenomenon where journalists no longer feel it's their job to report the news objectively the way they teach it in journalism faculties, and getting both sides of the story, but to push a certain story. And I've seen this in my career, coming to journalism, back to journalism for politics, and I'm relatively new at the Maine Wire. I was in politics for the last 20 years or so, and I've seen how advocacy and agenda journalism works, and it's not pretty. So the overall picture is pretty negative, but I'd like to, since I'm the last speaker, be a little bit positive here and say that things are changing. Things are changing not just in terms of the media and the medium and people moving from print to video to internet to TikTok to different types of media, but the demand for new information is changing, and that's what's going to drive the media market going forward into the future. While, as was mentioned, the Maine Trust for Local News, a subsidiary of the National Trust for Local News, is cutting costs and cutting journalists. In fact, the Maine Wire is growing. We started out as a small news, basically a newsletter, and now we're a website and a social media operation that has been hiring and getting new journalists, including one of our most recent journalists comes from the Portland Press Herald, where he worked for 30 years because he was let go by the Maine Trust for Local News. So overall, the landscape of the media is changing. My son, who is 25 years old, when he went to college recently, he said he wanted, and he did, he studied media studies. That was his major, and I was terrified. I was terrified because I thought, I want my son to have a good job when he gets out of school. And I didn't know what he was going to do. He's a smart kid, he's a hard worker. Why on earth is he studying media studies? And amazingly, he got a job. He got a job straight out of school, working for a YouTube channel that focuses on the automotive industry. And he developed his particular niche in the charging of electric vehicles. And that's been his thing, and that's the thing that he writes about. And he's got a following, and he got picked up by a major outfit that pays him to do this. And he's been doing this and getting paid for doing it for 2.5 years, but it's very niche. And that's where the media is going. The media is changing in terms of what it is that people are demanding. There's a reason why in my kitchen I've got a stack of Maine Sportsman's, and it's not just because I like Will. It's because when I moved back to Maine, I wanted to have some connection with the place where I live. And there is a demand for local news, which is going to get people to hone in on things like, and I don't want to blow the Maine Wire's horn too much, even though that's my job, but people are going to look at the Maine Wire because they're going to see something that they're not seeing in other places. They're not seeing it coming out of the Portland newspapers. And frankly, the Bangor paper has changed significantly from when I was a kid. It used to be a conservative newspaper, and we don't want to get too much into politics here, but it's now a unionized newspaper. It operates much differently and to a different agenda than it did when I was growing up in the state. And again, it's a generational thing. When I was a kid in high school, and we'll get back to the issue that we started with today, guns in school meant hunting between 5th and 6th period. That's what it used to be all about. And that's changed dramatically now. So how does the media cover this issue? And an incredibly small, I don't know if there's statistics on it, I looked, I couldn't find any. How many journalists own guns? And the answer is not many. During the fall election season, a friend of mine who's an older sort of mentor guy who's worked substantially in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Newsweek, I've always looked up to this guy as sort of a mentor and a wise figure in journalism. And he called me up because his daughter is a college student in Pennsylvania. And she's very politically active, very left-wing, and she wanted to talk to a gun owner. So my friend in Washington, D.C. called me up. We hadn't talked in 6 months because he couldn't think of anybody else to talk to a gun owner. And it kind of blew my mind, but that's where we are. So how can we expect journalists, if you look at the demographic of journalists today, they're younger, they're more urban. And when I think of my own son, who was born in Bangor, Maine, his views on the Second Amendment are very different than my views, because his views were formed by the Parkland shooting, by the Columbine shooting, by all these school shootings. And to be fair, he grew up in an urban environment. But we're speaking different languages. And he doesn't understand where I'm coming from. I try and understand where he's coming from. So educating journalists just about the issues is something that is everybody's job. And I think in this state, I tried to, after the session this morning, and there was talk about the Portland Press Herald and some of their advocacy, and it's pretty far out there, really, considering the rest of the state. But I think the Portland Press Herald realizes, as a business, they're failing. They're not making money. They're losing money. And we're seeing this across the media industry overall. I think the left-wing American media is beginning to understand that they're losing market share, and if they want to stay in the business, they're going to have to change. They're going to have to change away from agenda journalism. They're going to have to invite more viewpoints and let people who know what they're talking about argue and make their points, not just like commenting on a Facebook page, but informed commentary about the issues when it comes to Second Amendment issues, when it comes to hunting issues. Looking at Netflix recently, I saw a European show that talked about a reformed hunter, sort of like a reformed criminal. So in the European mindset, hunting is a bad thing. It's something that people do. It's some sort of caveman-like Paleolithic thing to do to hunt. Whereas here, it's part of our culture. It's part of our heritage. It's part of our life. So that's why journalism, if it's going to survive, and it is going to survive because we're always going to communicate, is going to become more local. And it's going to become more expert-focused. The Bangor Daily News recently let all of their columnists go. They fired all their columnists, and they said instead they're going to have experts. I don't know what that means. They let Matt Gagnon, who's the head of the Maine Policy Institute, which owns the Maine Wire, how is he not an expert? I mean, he's the head of the Maine Policy Institute. I don't know what kind of experts they're going to get, but they're lost in the wilderness. I think the Portland Press Herald is also a little bit lost in the wilderness. They have to find a way of getting better informed, better rooted voices to talk on their, not just their opinion pages, but also their news pages. And I think we're going to continue to see change. I don't think it's the end of the Fourth Estate, but the media that we're going to be looking at a year from now is very different than the one we've been looking at for the last few years.
I'd like to segue in with what he just said into what my comments were going to be. Nobody in this room knows it, but when I was a kid, I wrote for the Maine Sportsman. That's where I learned that I had a passion to write about the outdoors. I didn't care about anything else. Girls, all of it. I didn't care. I always wanted to hunt and fishing. And that's what I wrote about. Well, that changed in time, but I wanted to be a journalist. And after high school, where I was an athlete, I went on to take some college classes. And I remember the last course I took. The entire course was about how to manipulate a page to emphasize a political position. That was the lesson. And I kept asking the instructor, is that really the role of the journalist, is to manipulate the page, every image, every word, to come out with a political result? And he said, well, this lesson is to teach you that that's basically what's going on there. Well, that was quite a while ago, and I said, well, that's it for me. I don't want to be a journalist then. Because what you're saying is you don't want to show the truth and the facts. You want to create an image to promote a political agenda. So that was my last class. I write all the time. I write the newsletter with people like Ginny. But his comments around the Press Herald, I'm going to speak to that because there's a crossroad that's happening right now. Most people don't understand what the Press Herald has become. Journalism was always independent. It relied on selling ads in newspapers to pay their reporters, which kept them independent. When the Press Herald was struggling, they were trying to find a model to save the Press Herald. There's only a handful of states that allow even an entity like the Trust for Local News. I think there's now 8 maybe. And what they do is they create a hybrid, almost like a nonprofit, that no longer has a journalism goal, but a goal to do public education and charitable type activities. The for-profit component is gone. And now it's like education and charity. Except they're still involved in politics. They have an editorial page, and they're always influencing political issues. This is where the problem is. By creating these low-profit L3Cs, they're called, these entities are allowed to accept foundation monies to do their activities. Many of these foundations are politically motivated. There are some of the far left-leaning foundations that are promoting political policy, that are giving money to a press outlet, calling themselves the press, but accepting money, and then doing political advocacy on their editorial page. That may have saved them from going under, but it destroys their credibility when you understand it. So what frustrated me was when I saw, after the Lewiston shooting, I was interviewed by Frontline for over 3 hours. They shaped the article the way they wanted with the Press Herald. My frustration is that in order to continue getting money from foundations, you have to lean their way and shape your articles and your editorials to keep the money flowing. The only way the press survives long term, because I can tell you, as former Senate Chair of Taxation, talking with people in Washington, D.C., this country is not going to allow our press to be taken over by billionaires who are funding foundations and flowing that money into the press to then promote an agenda.
Say that again, David.
Okay.
You said our country is not going to allow.
Our Congress
Okay.
is not going to allow foundations that
How are they going to prevent it?
Okay, let me get to that. These foundations are tax exempt under nonprofit law. They don't pay taxes on the money that's coming into those foundations. The intent of nonprofits is to do charitable and educational work, plain and simple. Newspapers do a third thing. They advocate for political positions on their editorial page. Just recently, the Press Herald called for the repeal of the terrifying yellow flag and replace it with red flag. That's political advocacy. I, as a lobbyist and a nonprofit, have to report to the Maine Ethics Commission. I have to register as a lobbyist. I have to identify how much I spent and how many hours I've done it. The Press Herald does not. How is their editorial page any different when they're a nonprofit accepting foundation money, non-taxable? Why are they any different than me? And that is the issue that I have, and the Press Herald is going to have to struggle with and figure out a different model. You can't do political advocacy with nonprofit money.
But realistically, how do you stop them?
The Ways and Means Committee in Congress are likely to take up this issue as more and more states, I think there's somewhere between 8 and 10 now that allow these low-profit L3Cs.
Yeah.
They're going to have to figure out if they want to channel money, gray money, basically, dark money, into the press, which then manipulates the pages and influences the political issues that you learn about. And that's the part that I think needs to be addressed, and it will be. I know because I brought it to the attention of the right people, and they are looking at it nationally. Should they be doing that? What the Press Herald could do is they could eliminate taking positions politically on their editorial page. That would resolve some of it.
Which the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times did in this presidential election. They decided not to
Do you
endorse.
think, I'm going to ask some questions.
Yeah.
I sense that it has been a little bit more neutral in the last several, do you guys sense that, or am I dreaming?
I was just going to say, they'd have to change more than their op-ed page, because from cover to cover, it's opinion-based, slanted in one direction for that particular publication.
I can usually read the headline, and then you look down below and it says, from the Washington Post, when they're just bringing opinion pieces basically in like that. It's
Yeah. I actually enjoy opinion pieces. It's when editorial pieces are opinionated that I resent it. But I'm just, I would like to see old school, give me a story like Doge. I want to know what Doge is doing. What are they finding? What, you know?
Oh, you want news?
Yeah, I mean, because I don't really know what Doge is doing. I see Elon Musk, and my wife has a Tesla, with his kid on his head, right? Walking, you know, and I'd like to know what's happening. And I don't know where to find the story sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating.
To your point though, Bill, you just illustrated what my concerns were.
Mhm.
When you said that the Press Herald seems to be going more neutral,
Not the Press Herald. I think several publications will mention the Washington Post.
Yeah.
I think, you know,
Yeah.
I'm not after the Press Herald here today. I
Yeah.
just think there's been a little bit better journalism in the last few months. And I don't know if I'm dreaming or not.
well, I can tell you that from my perspective, the Press Herald in particular, they're going to have to do something because they're going to be on the bubble. When you look at all the L3Cs in Maine, there's nothing like the press. Everything else is these small little businesses that have a social agenda that are taking advantage of that component, and then you have the trust for local news. If they're going to survive, they're going to have to do something to give the appearance that they're not being political. Otherwise, they're going to be told by Congress and others, you can no longer do this. Because you can't mix foundation money. And lawyers have advised
Yeah.
foundations interested in giving money to L3Cs, be careful. Because it is a
No,
gray
and I
area.
think that's an interesting story. That's a good news story right there. Can David Trady, humble, mean guy that he is, rise up against a newspaper protected by the First Amendment because it's receiving, is it trust money that it's getting?
Yeah, it's
You know,
foundation
I mean,
money.
that's a great story. I'd like to get up and have my coffee and read that in the morning because that's interesting.
No, you need to write it.
Well, you know, it's a hard story to do, and how can you get your story out? And
Yeah.
it's interesting.
I think that this was, the wheels were set in motion before this last election. I think
Yeah.
for the last, probably, at least since COVID, maybe even before, the media was put on alert that people were losing trust and losing faith. But this pushed it right to the front.
See, but I think another way that editorial content is determined is based on who gets hired. And, you know, in my mind, an editor does tell you what story you can do, or you run it. You know, in the news, in the television newsroom, the day starts at, when they cut you overtime back 9 o'clock. And you'd come in with story ideas, and if you were any good, you had your story the night before, so you could start earlier, but here we go. And you would discuss what it's going to be, and you'd look at the newscast, and okay, that's going to be our lead, that's going to be in the first segment, that's the first segment. And then there might be, you know, more of a magazine type of story to lead the second segment, and then they used to have sports, and then weather. And so you'd kind of have that outline of the day, and then whatever happened that day, happened that day. But based on who's in the newsroom, you know, their personal feelings, you know, you can slant a story, and it can still be truthful.
Right.
You know, and so, you know, based on, you know, who the editors are and who the reporters are. Is that a question?
No,
Oh,
it's a statement.
was that a bid? Are you bidding?
It's a statement addressing what you're saying. A report came out that of all the people hired to be journalists, 99% of them are far left. That's one issue. Another issue is when you've got a political contest, they like to endorse a candidate. And who do you think they endorse every single time? That's bias.
You know, and the same can be said about college campuses. You know, what percentage of your professors are Republicans and what are Democrats? And what outside of your science department are Republicans and Democrats? And so, yeah.
I think this has created an opening for a legitimate restoration of journalism, honest journalism, because it's so refreshing. I've been told more times than not that I am blunt but honest, and that sticks out. Shouldn't that be what all of us do? I think there's an opening right now for a journalist or an outfit to show up and just give you truly accurate information and let you choose. And I think that's coming, and because of what you've been talking about.
We have to trust the market, and we have to trust readers, and the media is going to start doing this. Yes, there are billionaires who control the media. If we look at what is the National Trust for Local News, it's a progressive Swiss billionaire named Hans-Georg Weiss and the famous George Soros. Those are two of the major funders of this news organization that owns most of the newspapers in Maine currently, one of whom is not even American. Who owns Twitter? Elon Musk. Billionaires have always been part of the media establishment. That's not necessarily new. What we want them to do is to fight. We want competition because we want, as the public and the readers and the watchers and the consumers of the news have to be the ones who tell the news organizations what to cover. Not how to cover it or what to say, but to demand what kind of coverage, what focus they're looking at. I'll give an example from another country. I spent a lot of time working in the former Soviet Union, a country called Ukraine, which is at war currently. You have East and you have West Ukraine. East, they say, our media, the American media, calls them pro-Russians. That's not necessarily accurate, but still that's what the American media says. So you have the pro-Russians in the East and the pro-Europeans in the West. I've done opinion survey after opinion survey of the Ukrainian public. I've done hundreds of surveys to find out what news channels they watch. And guess what? All of them watch everything. They don't just watch the kind they like. We're naive in America. We decide, oh, we like Fox because it tells us what we want to hear. We like CNN because it tells us what we want to hear. Some people have compared the media to taking a warm bath, something that makes you feel good. Well, it shouldn't be. We need to read everything. I read everything from Mother Jones on the far left to Breitbart on the far right. Why? Because if I don't, I'm not going to have any idea what's going on. It's my job as a person, as a citizen, as a news consumer to read everything. And I think more and more people are becoming wise to that. It's not just that there's fake news on the internet. Sure, there's news that may not be well sourced, but it's our job to figure out what's real and what's not. And we are the market, and we're going to decide, what media we want.
The last, what I thought was objective television news program I watched was Al Jazeera America, ironically enough.
Coming out of Qatar.
And they got rid of it. It's no longer available for us to see. So I don't watch national news.
Any questions before we wrap up? Yeah, go ahead, Eddie.
I think I saw on the main line this morning that the top editors in the Portland Press Herald stepped down.
Laura DeSisto, I think, is what it was talking about. Who had been the head of the. She stepped down in December. But they're facing some changes. And to Bill's point, the media they get it. When the President Trump's current press secretary gave her first press conference 2 weeks ago, the first thing she cited, and I apologize, I was a little late, it may have already been mentioned, was a Gallup poll saying that less than 40% of Americans trust the media. That's a big problem for the media. And the media, they can read too. They get it. And the billionaires who own these media outlets, some of them may be happy to lose money, but it's been my experience that rich people don't like losing money. And so they want their businesses to work. That's why Jeff Bezos didn't endorse in the presidential election. He told the Washington Post, pull back. He also probably figured out what was going to happen too, and the Washington Post has to be able to talk to the next president. But still, they're business owners, they're businessmen, and they don't want to lose market share. They need us more than we need them.
David and I communicate frequently. We work together on policy issues. We work together on the State of Maine Sportsman Show, March 28th through 30th at the Augusta Civic Center. Bring all your friends. I do support, he's always disappointed when the magazine comes out because I haven't adopted his latest effort in a headline somewhere. David, you have to read to the end.
Okay.
You have to be subtle.
Okay.
And so this is the Smiling Sportsman toward the end of every Maine Sportsman. Snow White arrived to see her cottage on fire. As she searched through the burning rubble, frantically calling the names of her 7 dwarves, she heard a voice from the collapsed basement say, "A 3-day waiting period for firearms sales is a good idea." "Thank goodness," she said, "at least I know Dopey's alive."
Well done.
So you have to read the whole thing.
Well done. Well, I would like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank the panelists. It's been a long day. Appreciate the folks that are coming here and trusting us enough that we're going to treat you right to come here and present. And that's the thing that I take from these SAM congresses, that people like Nate and Jen and others trust us enough that we're not going to get you in a got-you moment and come here and present, because our members become far more educated when people like yourselves come here and do that, just like these panelists. So I just want to say thank you for that. We'll always treat you right. But with that, I think we're going to wrap it up and say thank you to all of you.
Good job, guys.